15 minutes past the 8 o'clock hour. Chris Lenois back with you on the Green Mountain Mornings program. And, of course, on Fridays during the 8 o'clock hour, we always get together with Randy Holhut, Deputy Editor of the Commons, joining us on phone from his Dummerston compound. Good to hear from you, Randy. Good morning to you.
Hi, Joyce.
Good morning to Joyce. Appreciate you all calling in. I actually put up the wrong channel there, but we got half of your welcome on a Friday morning here. Oh, man. Want to start actually talking about the Commons as a business, or I should say as a nonprofit independent news and views source. Situation here where a lot of different organizations during the fall put out the pledge drive, please, the Commons no exception there. Good time, Randy, to remind everybody of the growth in your organization, both in circulation and in staff, and the ways that you fund that, which is really through all of us.
Yes, we're no different than our other nonprofit brethren and sistren that we have to.
I like that, sistren.
Hat tip to Molly Ivins. But we do have to ask our fans, and there are many of them out there, every now and again, that, if you really love us, to do more than just hit like on Facebook or send links around to your friends. It's not mandatory that you give money to the Commons, but if you like what we're doing, which is good local journalism, you asked every now and again to help pay for it.
Yeah, it is a situation where it's a free publication, and you can even go to commonsnews.org, and there's no paywall there either for the content, but this content is not just generated gratuitously. It is something that you all put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into and deserve compensation for, and you have advertising revenue, and you also have membership revenue. And I don't know what the balance is there between those two, but you need a healthy amount of both of those in order to do what you're doing. Your circulation now, have you reached 10,000? I think you have.
We have.
Yeah, I mean, that's terrific. Clearly people love the product, and it's something that, again, when we talk about, and I think it's worth reminding people too about nonprofit as a resource for journalism in this world where we see more and more bottom line sort of media, to have a source like this and the freedom it gives you as media.
Yes, that we're not beholden to advertisers, to corporate ownership or any other pressures. You can see, probably the rock bottom of what happens when you have corporate lowest common denominator journalism was the Commander-in-Chief Forum on Wednesday night, and what you get with vapid corporate journalism. We try to go deeper into stories, and we tried to take a closer look at things. Our approach, some might call it slow news, because we're not chasing after every little blip in the news cycle.
Yeah, and certainly that is one of the things I really value about the Commons as a weekly is the longer articles, the work that Olga does there, Wendy and Mike and other members of the staff, some of the part-time writers as well, that really are able to explore some of the depths of the stories. And we're going to get into some of those. You have a story in this week's edition of the Commons as well, previewing the American Legion lecture series on the War on Terror, which actually kicked off last night with Lieutenant Colonel John Hagen. Is it Hagen?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know if it was Hagen, like if he stayed true to his roots or something like that. But so Lieutenant Colonel John Hagen recently joining the American Legion?
Yes. He's settling in here. He's his last gig was running the Air Force ROTC program at UMass. But he's an interesting character in terms of that he spent, for an Air Force colonel, he spent an awful lot of time in academia in terms of getting multiple master's degree and a doctorate from the Fletcher School of Diplomacy at Tufts University, which is, in terms of international law, one of the premier schools in the country. And he's got a lot of, he's trying to diversify the Legion in terms of getting the younger people in, because, the World War II generation is passing on, as well as the Korean guys. the Vietnam guys are in their 70s, 60s now, and 70s for the older ones, and even the Gulf War people who are in their 40s and 50s now.
Yeah, good point. Well, I would say that if his specialty, as you write in your article, is intractable conflict, that's pretty good job security right about now, because that seems to be where we are with this war on terror. Now, they're using September 11th, 2001, which we are about to observe the 15th anniversary of, as kind of a launching point. But it's interesting when you really think about the whole history of that region and our whole conflict with Muslim nations. One could argue that September 11, 2001 is far from the starting point. It might be the starting point when people became aware that we were at war. But really, I think you and I, thinking back to maybe the Iranian hostage crisis or funding the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, this is a decades-long conflict that really is very complicated, a lot to unpack there.
Yes, plus the blowback from our various adventures, like funding the Mujahideen or the arms for hostages dealings with Iran back during the Reagan years, or Mogadishu and the Black Hawk Down debacle, or the bombings of the embassies in Kenya, or the bombing of the USS Cole back in 1999, and all the warnings that the Clinton people gave to the incoming Bush administration that, hey, this guy Osama bin Laden, he's going to be your number one source of headaches and trouble going forward. You better do something, keep an eye on this.
Yeah,
and of course they didn't, and we know what happened after that.
Yeah, as true Americans, we don't start paying attention to it until it's on our doorstep, and that's really what happened on September 11th, 2001. So a great launching point for this lecture series, and a great person to partner with in Bill Holliday at the Brattleboro Union High School, wanting to get younger people in there for these lectures. What do you think in terms of his direction for this? What is he hoping to bring to the table in terms of making people aware about the situation, about this, I'm going to put air quotes around war on terror, because it is a situation that's really hard to just put these broad brushstroke kind of labels on.
Well, the main thing is that, this has been such a different conflict for America. So few of us have been involved in the actual fighting of it. Less than 1% of Americans have any involvement with the military today in America. The rich have not been asked to pay more in taxes to pay for this war, like every other conflict in the history of this country. There hasn't been a formal beginning to this war, and there doesn't look like there'll be a formal end to this war. There's going to be no, ceremony on the deck of the USS Missouri signing a peace treaty.
Right.
And it's a war that has no front line. It has no rear area. It's all over literally all over the map, not just Iraq and Afghanistan, but Africa, the whole Persian Gulf from Morocco to the doorstep of China.
Yeah, certainly, and in the cyber world as well. And that's another whole element of this. And I think it sounds like Lieutenant Colonel John Hagan has taken that into account with the different events that he has planned. You write about all of them in the article you have in this week's edition of the Commons, free on stands, also on commonsnews.org, so people can get the full schedule there, and I'm sure on the American Legion Post 5 website. We will continue talking with Randy Holhut, Deputy Editor of the Commons, about other articles in this week's edition of the Commons after the bottom of the hour news break. Stick around for more on Green Mountain Mornings. 72 degrees outside at 21 minutes before the 9 o'clock hour. Chris Lenois back with you on the Green Mountain Mornings program and continuing our conversation with Randy Holhut, Deputy Editor of the Commons, your award-winning independent nonprofit source of news and views for Windham County. Free on stands every Wednesday. Online at commonsnews.org. Go there and become a member today. You get such nice bonuses as having it delivered to you through the mail. Like me, I'm a member of the Commons family, and it's nice to just walk to my mailbox every Thursday and pick up the Commons and read it, and then have this conversation with Randy on Friday mornings. The story that Mike Fair wrote about the Brattleboro Retreat and some of the changes they've had to make in policies after a unfortunate suicide earlier this year, going back to the month of May. And the suicide actually happened after this patient was discharged, and that really is where some of these protocols that they had to look at with the state probe and some of the policy changes they had to make stem in terms of how one follows patients once they're discharged and the process of discharging them. But before we get into some of that, I wanted to ask you, just in terms of reporting on something like this, and Mike, and working with an organization like the Retreat, they seem to me to be pretty cooperative as an organization can be in these situations, or would want to be in difficult situations like this. I don't know from your perspective how that's been.
Well, with a situation like this, it kind of pays to be as transparent as you can legally be without violating any of the HIPAA laws regarding divulging healthcare information. And we did our best, and they did their best to protect the identity of the person in question that was involved with this. But this is a difficult situation because how much responsibility does a hospital have, be it a medical hospital or a mental health hospital, after you've been discharged?
Yeah, I mean that really there was a legal case, not about this incident, but no, it wasn't about this incident, but another incident that did involve a patient who had been discharged from the Retreat for a long time, and how much responsibility were they liable for lawsuits for actions taken by patients who were outside the care, and the Supreme Court said they don't bear that responsibility, but. We hear in the medical world now this term of following your patients after they're discharged. And really in a situation like this, that's what they were looking at, and probably as best they could made the decisions that they made on how they would change the protocols. But this is a reality that every medical facility, whether it's physical health or mental health, is dealing with now in this new world.
And it's easy to second guess when something happens.
Yeah. Right.
and this is pretty much what's going on here. That how do you tell when you're discharging someone from your care that the patient is okay?
Yeah, and there's plenty of instances that never get reported on where they do discharge patients and the patients are okay. It only comes to light after something goes wrong. That's part of the regulatory landscape. They're not going to look at the successes other than statistics. But they are going to look at some of these cases, even though it brings more scrutiny on an organization like the Retreat. You'd like to think this is leading to better outcomes for the patients.
Well, you'd like to think that too, but a lot of times that for medical institutions, they don't get the better outcomes until they get the scrutiny. No,
they don't. And let's face it, the Brattleboro Retreat has gotten more than its share of scrutiny since Tropical Storm Irene. When they had to take in a lot of the patients who were in the state facility up in Waterbury, and that's really changed the amount of attention they've had, probably ending up being the better in the end for, well, you can't really call it trial by fire, right? Maybe more trial by water?
Well, this is a case of, now that there are state and federal tax dollars involved with paying for the cost of treating patients at the Retreat and the secure facility that's being used, that now there's a little more oversight and a little more attention than I think the Retreat is used to seeing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Mike, talking to mostly what was identified as Retreat administrators in this article, and I've had opportunity to talk with Louis Josephson, the new president and CEO, and I know Mike has as well. I'd like to think that as this new healthcare landscape shakes out and we understand the mental health role in it, that the worst days of the Retreat are behind them. It still is. When I remember when I talked to Dr. Josephson, it was in the midst of some of these investigations. It was prior to this suicide incident in May, but certainly there was a lot of things going on, and I was like, why did you choose to take this job? And he felt like the Retreat's reputation nationally was still very strong.
Yeah, by virtue of it's being one of the oldest institutions of its type, and that's still being a private psychiatric hospital. There's not many of them left. Right.
And looking at some of those new protocols and some of the ways that they are being paid attention to now that there's a lot of federal and state tax dollars, which, let's face it, they're going to have to depend upon. It's going to have to be stuff that is coming through Medicare, Medicaid, that is going to sustain a hospital like the Retreat versus the private money that may have come through in the past.
Well, like it sustains Brattleboro Memorial Hospital.
Exactly, like it sustains Brattleboro Memorial Hospital. Bottom of the fold story in the Commons this week, also by Mike Fair, about the burglaries up in Marlboro and the rash of burglaries there. And we've seen this happen, different pockets of Windham County getting different types of robberies at different times. What struck me about this particular series of break-ins was the targeting of musical instruments. And obviously up in Marlboro, probably a fair share of homes have musical instruments, but it didn't seem like, hey, we're just going to go down this line of homes. Like, say, I think one of the comparisons the state trooper that he speaks to makes is to a group of homes in the Stratton area where you probably know people are unoccupied, maybe their second homes. It felt to me like this Marlboro thing was much more personal in how it was targeted.
Well, the dirtbaggery tends to, either be amateurish, which is, the ransacking of
Right.
houses, or professional, as in we hear from some of our law enforcement people that some of the break-ins are kind of like shopping, that they have lists from the people they deliver the goods to that, hey, get me this, and I'll give you your fix.
Right. Yeah, I like that. There was some sophisticated dirtbaggery going on in this case. But you think about targeting musical instruments, and I think back to when the Vermont Jazz Center was cleaned out of a lot of their audio equipment. Clearly, there is a fence operation in this area that specializes in musical equipment.
Well, but there's very little to trace it on. It's not
Right.
like there's serial numbers written on the guitars or anything.
Right.
And maybe they are. I'm not, not being a musician, I wouldn't know specifically. But the people who have been hitting the houses have been going for the stuff that's easy to carry and easy to defense, which is televisions, computers, and musical instruments.
Yeah, I have to say, I loved the advice from Sergeant Buckley, the Vermont State Police, to Mike in this article where he's talking about game cameras. Now, I have to admit, in my computer nerddom, I thought he was talking about like cameras that were used in video games, but he's talking about these hunting cameras, and I went and looked up some of these things. These things are pretty cool.
Yeah, they've become really common, for landowners to try and see, what kind of animals are traipsing through your property.
Right.
But the more technically inclined of our homeowners are using them to as kind of informal monitors of who's coming and going on their property. You can set them to take pictures at regular intervals, or that they be tripped by passing through kind of a optical eye, and the camera will take the picture.
Yeah.
And it's really helped out in a lot of investigations that the state police can put out pictures of the dirtbag in action, breaking into the house or leaving the premises, and helps lead to arrest that way. At
a high resolution too. Those cameras, I was reading about some of them, even the ones that are under $200 in price, can take some pretty high resolution images. You think about sometimes you see grainy surveillance footage and things like that. You really can be doing a lot to help yourself, obviously, but also the police in their investigation by investing in these. And this is the reality of living in rural Vermont. I think a lot of people think they move to rural Vermont or any rural area and they're kind of set out from and separated from crime, but that's never really been the case here in Windham County, has it?
Well, it's also you're separated from law enforcement too. That
right.
The response time is much longer because the distances between the houses and the police. Yeah.
Wrapping up our conversation with Randy Holhut of the Commons, as we always do, turning to the gridiron and the fields that are part of the high school sports scene, and your sports page on the back of the Voices section this week. Bellows Falls looking good in football and field hockey.
As the field hockey team is a machine. Bethany Corson has developed a program that gets them in young, trains them, and plugs them in as they're needed. And it was a pretty vigorous beatdown that they gave Brattleboro in the season opener last Friday.
Yeah, 4-0 is a big deficit in any kind of field hockey sport on any level. And the 42 points Bellows Falls put up in their opener?
They scored on their first 6 possessions of the game and led 42-0 in the half against Springfield, and it wasn't even fair.
Yeah, they've got a great program up there. Twin Valley has a great soccer program. They're off to a great start as well.
Yes, they are, and was at a great game on Wednesday with the girls, Leland Gray and in Twin Valley, and that was settled in overtime of a 4-3 result. The big star of Leland Gray, Ashley Bates, she had 5 goals in her first game of the season. She only got 1 goal on Wednesday, but it turned out to be the game winner in extra time.
Nice. That's so great when you see those dominant players on the high school fields. Hopefully the Brattleboro boys football team, their home opener tonight at Natowich, hopefully they'll get back on track after their away loss to Hartford. Are you going to be there tonight?
Hopefully everyone who's supposed to be there is there. There was a lot of guys out through the injury and suspensions.
Right.
But this is, from what I'm hearing, the suspended kids are back. The injury kids, I think Mr. Takite, he will be back in harness.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Tonight, and so won't Tony Martinez, the quarterback.
Right. Yeah, those are key players to bring back and hopefully get a W in the column. You're going to be out there? You're going to be at Natowich?
I will be at Natowich tonight and see what if they can get it together on the home field.
All right. Well, looking forward to your photos in next week's edition of The Commons and our conversation about it next Friday. Thanks for your time this morning, Randy.
Okay, have a good weekend.
You too. Randy Holhut, Deputy Editor of The Commons, your reader-supported, award-winning independent news and views source for Windham County. Back to wrap up this edition of Green Mountain Mornings after these messages.